if you need a ride, and if you need a professional driver, if you need a ride in Berlin, in Germany, or all over the world, then I guess the Black Lane is service for you. And that's the only thing that I'm going to say about the Black Lane. We also have iOS, of course, iOS app, so you can download the app, play a little bit. We also have 2 iOS developers in our team. I see one here, Alexei. Say hey, and then I cannot see Stanislav.
He's outside waiting for people.
Okay,
who's coming.
Probably later on. And one more thing I would like to mention, and that is me. And that is a Twitter wall. We have official hashtag Cocoaheads Berlin, and if you tweet with this hashtag, it will first appear. And the second of all, at the very end, after 2 talks, we will do kind of a game. So we'll randomly choose one of the Twitter account and give away voucher for 30 euros. So you can try Black Lane or you're wrong. If we choose Alexei, who is our developer pro, we will do it randomly again. So feel free to tweet about it. I hope that this will disturb too much the presenter. And that's it for my side. So enjoy the talk. See you afterwards. Woo! Online saboteurs. Yes. Everything is recorded, so yeah. Watch out.
Cool, so good evening everybody. Can you hear me in the back? Good. So thank you again for Black Lane for hosting, or organizers as well. Thank you all for being here. My name is Thiago, and I don't work for Couchbase. I'm here on like a volunteer because I see many other colleagues having data synchronization issues in their apps, and I'm sure that many people can benefit a bit in some way. I will compare this to Git, the idea of distributed versioning system, because they have a lot of similarities with Git. And I don't know about you, but nowadays I cannot think of working anymore without Git. Do you still remember when you worked without Git? I mean, in the same way that I see Git helping us in our workflow of software development, the topic that I'm going to mention today here can help you to handle data synchronization things, and I believe really, data is core to any or most applications out there. So I think it's a pretty important topic in general. So how many of you, just so I have an idea, have heard about Couchbase? Oh, cool. A lot of people actually. How many used? Okay. There's always time to change. All right. So what do I mean by changing user experience? I think like in the end of the day, it's really cool to code, but we're actually changing the way people experience things and services, like Black Lane, for example. You think about any other company, they're changing the way people experience music or media and so on. So the topic, this topic will deeply affect how your users actually interact with your app in real life, because sometimes we pretend everything is working fine, but it's not like that, as we know. So, before I get into any details, technically, I want to give a little real life story that happened to me. So please bear with me, it will make sense in the end. And it started with my father back in 2007. He was getting to the business of coffee, and unlike normal Brazilians, instead of playing football, I was using my vacation to develop a little system for him. And the idea was that we could somehow automate everything, or at least some things. I was young, I was learning to program. I wanted to use my fresh skills in the system, and so I started developing what was like a website in a mini ERP. And it had some basic stuff like, the old way we used to do things like a form, some things you can enter in the system and so on. And back then, how did we do things? It was really straightforward, right? I think you know this word lamp. So it was pretty good times, right? Just set up the stack and you're ready to program and everything is fine. But then when I was done, we thought, all right, let's use the system, right? And where he was using the system is in a little village in the middle of nowhere. And then we hit the problem. Can anybody guess what the problem we had when we tried it? So it was a web-based system with MySQL in the back, PHP, standard stuff, right? So it was basically web application.
All dial.
Sorry?
It's all dial.
Didn't hear you?
It's all dial-up internet.
Yeah. So first thing, we barely had smartphones in 2007, right? But we could still carry a notebook. Let's say push it that way, problem solved. But like you guessed, the net. This was actually I made this capture like a few days ago, and you see it still lags like in many areas. You don't have a coverage, right? And even here in Berlin. I thought when you come to Berlin, everything is going to be LTE and fine, and so you just go to the subway and your connection is gone, right? So we don't need to actually go so far away to see this problem, and it's a pattern that is always recurring and hunting me somehow. Last weekend, even so, I work for Here Maps. Does anybody know Here Maps? It's kind of Google Maps. So what happened to me was I made a transit route, and that requires an online connection. And I had no problem. I mean, it's expectable, right? The transit can change. Like today, the train was late, so you need real-time data, and that's fine. So I got in the subway, and somebody came to me and said, "Hey, can you help me find whatever place?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." I cleared my route. I put his address. I still had like 2 bars of edge in my cell phone, so I managed to find his route. But then I cleared it again, and my train arrived, so I had to quickly hop in without actually entering my route again. And well, it was searching. Of course, this is a little bit misleading because it looks like I have a connection. Screenshot purposes. But in the end, I had no transit route. But actually, everything I wanted to see was the route I just made, right? So really, couldn't we just show what I just fetched like 10 seconds ago? And this is really like, I think, one of the best apps for offline guidance. But we still can do better. So imagine how many areas other apps can improve when you have access to cache data, right? Other examples, Spotify. This is an interesting one. I was listening to music, and then without internet connection, I heard advertising. So I was like, wow, cool, and even with video, So, if they can make money by using cached data, I'm sure we can do it in other things as well, not just advertising, right? And there are many other thousands of applications for this, or hobby projects, Internet of Things, you name it, because everybody has the coverage problem of network. So, it's getting better, the coverage, but I still think it's really years away to come a day that we say, okay, we have no internet connection, right? Overall, I mean, we do have internet connection. This was an interesting project recently launched that they called Multi-Fire. It's like they're using the unlicensed spectrum to inject LTE signal parallel to Wi-Fi. So they could put coverage in subways even, but it's a brand new project. I mean, it's gonna take a long time before we benefit of always connected situation. And if you think about it, it's really a lot about really how long data exploration and where your data is sitting at. So the question is, can we do better? Oh yes. And so like I said, I'm gonna make a comparison to Git because there's a lot of similarities. But before I dive into it, really to recognize the problem, we need to do a little bit of research. And therefore, when I found this framework, Couchbase, I started to get into distributed databases. And the technology that they've been developing over the years there, turns out, tackles a lot of the problems that we have in the mobile side as well, not only in data centers. So what is the description of a distributed database? This is from Wikipedia. So you have portions of data stored in multiple computers, because of course many computers is cheaper than just one, right? You have different locations of this data, and the network, the whole system should survive even if a set of nodes falls from the network. That's what the clustering means, that you have like a failover setup and so on, right? So it turns out that this kind of technology, this kind of things we want as well to push to the edge of the network, which are the mobile apps and even web applications. So how do we analyze these DBs? I really encourage you to search the best tool for your problem. And for that, I mean, I cannot just teach everything in 50 minutes, we're short in time, but at least I want you to kind of know how to learn and how to find your way around on your own, right? So, NoSQL databases, they've been popping up a lot recently because they scale better. And there must be like a trade-off, right? Because, you know, MySQL, for example, has been, the relational database have been for a long time there. Why cannot they be just the best already? And one way to analyze it is something called a CAP theorem. Anybody heard of it? Okay, a few over there. So each letter here stands for one thing. And C's consistency means that once you have a cluster of computers, consistency will indicate if your data is the same everywhere, okay? The A stands for availability, so can your system respond even if your data is not consistent? It doesn't matter if it's consistent or not, can it respond in a certain amount of time? Like, is it gonna expire and you get a response, or is it just going to fail? And the last one is partition tolerance, which means if a settle node falls down, can it continue operating, even if that network cannot be reached? So how does that compare to relational databases? It's always a trade-off, like I said, it's no magic. In the case of relational databases, you are trading partition tolerance, you get more consistency and availability, right? The database I'm talking about today is like Couchbase, more or less, CouchDB, sorry. In terms that it's relaxing consistency in order for you to get better partition tolerance and availability, okay? So, what does that mean, right? So the relational database like MySQL, they are really transactional, right? So think about a bank, or you're booking a hotel room in Austria for snowboarding, I don't know. This kind of stuff you need to be sure that the operation completed or failed, right? You cannot say, maybe it will work, because somebody else will book your ticket and then you get there and there's no room for you, right? So it's like, you always have to analyze whether it must be real time or it can be like a delayed operation. Is it clear so far? More or less? Okay. Just hang on with me, it's gonna get there. So like I said, I was searching for a solution to this problem that I told you of, of the sales guy without internet and so on. And the best one I found, it was Couchbase for several reasons. For me, it was easy to start, like a single developer could play around quickly with it. It's open source. By the way, this thing was new for me. That the data is stored in JSON. I was like, why JSON, right? But it turns out that it's really cool to work with JSON because before I used to use core data, and oh my god, have you had these migration problems with the core data system? Like you just want to change your structure and then everything, right? And this is a big advantage of JSON because you can really easily change your data, so you can quickly evolve and prototype without much headache. Alright, so I said a lot of stuff, but how do we solve the problem? And before that, yes, there is Parse, there was Firebase and CloudKit. Each one has had its downsides. Like CloudKit, you're gonna get locked into Apple, so how do you work with Android, or maybe you want to make a web application? Firebase is also nice. It's a bit of a lock-in as well, but it depends on your needs. You know, Parse, I've tried. Have anybody heard of Parse from Facebook? Alright, don't be sad.
There is hope.
Yeah, I mean, it was nice that they open sourced it and so on, but yeah, kind of a cold water now, right? So maybe it's a chance for you to consider something like Couchbase Mobile. So how do they solve the problem? And finally, they have a different, not a different, let's say. They had to think of a design which would work cross-platform and would actually sync your data in a different manner that we're used to with the normal request response models. And the way they did this is by having actually the database itself on the client. So instead of having like an authority place in the server where all your data is, they push the database to the client. And if you think about it, man, it's not going to scale, right? I mean, if you have a copy of the database, that's not going to work, for sure. But instead of doing that, they are sharing one database across your whole application, and a subset of this data will actually sync to what really matters. You know? So that's kind of the concept that they've came to solve the problem. That you don't waste space and etc. So I'm pretty sure you're familiar with this. You know, common HTTP request response. But what is happening here? Can anybody guess? Like, what are the main things that are happening in this transaction? You know, you have your endpoints, this pretty standard stuff. So in order for this to succeed, there are three key things. Authentication, you must know the client is who he is. Authorization, is he allowed to do this or that? And data validation. So how do we do this in a way that is prone to connection problems? And that's the way they came up with. So you have the request is actually, your data is in a document, and this document contains what it means. So it will have like a type, let's say contact. So before we had like a contact operation here, but now we have a document which is of type contact. And when it's possible to do the sync, this guy here will do these three things. So we need an extra component here. For when the data comes, he will do the same thing, because you cannot ignore these problems. This is the architecture of the whole system together when everything is connected. And it's available for many platforms, Android, iOS, web, whatever you name it. In iOS it's called Couchbase Lite, which stands for a database running on your mobile device, basically. And this database, it's a little framework that you can connect to the rest of the system. So, now I'm gonna get a little bit more into details of implementation, okay? On how to actually do this. maybe you're not. Some things will be a bit weird at the beginning, but I promise once you try it, it's not that hard later on. At least I want you to get an idea of how to go around it for on your own. So, 3 components: the mobile app. Then we have a sync gateway. This guy is the component. It's a Go program that is responsible for validation, authorization, authentication. If you think about it, it's like this guy's like the Git merge. You know, he's gonna get the documents and he has the rules to know what to do when you have a conflict, or is he authorized to do so, and so on. Okay. So that's like the little Git component in the middle there. And of course, you need to store your data somewhere. So you have the server in the end to store everything. And well, in Couchbase Lite, when you want to save and query data, because it's a JSON document model, they have these things exposed. You don't have to worry too much about it, because when you do an SQL query, many things are actually happening under the hood that we don't know, and this is kind of exposing it. But in the end, it's all just a way to save and retrieve data. It's nothing too scary, like I'm going to show you right now. So how do you save a document in Couchbase Lite? Can you read from there, in the back? Yeah? That's it. That's the code, basically. And this dictionary here will contain your data. So it's kind of inside it will be a JSON document, right? You'll get an instance of the database, you create a document, and you save it later on. So how do I retrieve it back? This is a little function. Like I said, they have this concept of document views and queries. There's a technical reason underlying this, but what you need to know is that you need to make a query, you need a view. This is kind of a table, normal table if you think about it in SQL. And this table is generated automatically from the document. And you also define the view in your program. So, first step, create the view. This little function here, so it's like a function parsing the JSON, and this emit function will generate the index, okay? So it's kind of popping up these tables internally for you. And then you can make the query and fetch data from this table. Then it's pretty simple. You just create like, they have an object CBL query, create query, and you pass this into the function itself. So you see here you have a key, and I'm filtering the results based on the key that comes from the parameter of the function. So finally, you can do whatever you want with the data. Well, that was hard for a query, right? But it's not too bad. So what happened here? If I press in the user, it's gonna filter the user there, and now I'm getting only the user results that I specified. So cool. Now how do I sync this with the whole system? They have some objects for that. Replication objects, they call it. Basically, you just point it to the sync gateway, which is this merging component that I told you about, and it will just work. Okay, hopefully. But it does. I tested. Don't worry. Okay, so now I'm going to go away from the client and go into the middle component, the sync gateway, which is getting this client requests and operating the database. It's like a glue between the database and the mobile side. How do you set it up? You have a little function where you say, where's your server, where's your data set, and you give it a little function. This function here is like, this is at the heart of this synchronization thing. It's really like the rules for Git merge, let's say like that. So this guy will do validation, authorization, and data routing. What kind of thing you would put in the function? So they have this, it's a JavaScript-like language with some functions from the Sync Gateway where you can put your whole business logic to validate your document and so on. They have a concept of channels, which means channels is the way they designed to make, how do you say, which kind of document goes where. So is this user supposed to receive this document, or is this backend supposed to get this document, and so on. And this access function, what is it doing really? It's checking the document, and then it's comparing to the section credentials and seeing, okay, is this guy who he's claiming to be, or is it the right one? And the section is coming through a normal HTTP request, but this is done under the hood for you, you don't have to worry about it. Okay, so at the end we have data scalability, because we're only going to replicate documents relevant to the user. We can have authenticate access control to see who should see what, and who is allowed to do what in this system. And to make sure that the data is valid, because even though it's JSON, it's flexible and so on, you still want to make sure it makes sense for your application, of course. So normally what they recommend is you test the hell of your document to make sure that no user is doing some tricky things, because anybody could register and start sending data to the Sync Gateway, right? On a custom client, let's say like that. Okay, so what are the advantages finally? Once you set all of this thing up, it doesn't take that long, to be honest. You're going to do it gradually. The sync function is going to be done gradually, more or less, as you do your application. And in the end of the day, you can hook in your app listeners for events that are happening in your system. And then you can know if, so they have like 3 modes, whether the database changed, the document changed, and this live query thing. What this means is, once you set everything up, the framework will call a function in your app, which will update the interface. So there's no more bundling involved in your application. You can basically set everything up, put the rules, and the screen will be updated, the view, let's say, will be updated according to your data. And all of this orchestration is happening under the hood for you kind of automatically. In the same way that Git helps us to automate some things, the framework will help you automate this boring stuff, because in the end, we don't want to care about sync, right? We want to do our apps and focus on the user needs. So it kind of remove the hassle and make everything very reactive for the user. Like I said, it's not a one solution for all. You have to always think, does this need to be real time or not? But when it doesn't need to be, then you should be doing this, because then you avoid all of those problems that you cannot even expect sometimes, how the network is going to behave. And when it does, you're going to be safe, because in the end you're working with a local database, which eventually, or when they have a connection, will get synced to the cloud, right? So as a bonus, Couchbase Mobile, they are kind of using an open protocol for synchronization. And then you can connect it to many things. And one really cool thing that I find is that you set this up once, and you can sync your web apps, you can sync Android, you can sync Java. They have a Java client, they have a .NET client, they have Xamarin, interoperability, and so on. So you can quickly build really apps that will survive or be more, let's say, less prone to any network problem that you may have. And not only that, it becomes much faster, because imagine you have like a web page, and every time you do something, you do an HTTP request, and you do another HTTP, and so on. So every time you have a little delay, right, from the network to refresh everything. Now when you start shifting this thinking model of everything is a request, like we used to do in 2007 until today, and think a little bit more in a way to distribute your data this way, then you get a lot of speed in your app and a lot of responsiveness. And and much less code bundling, let's say like that, that you're worrying about versioning or what happens when this is going through and this is not. Because all of this conflict management can be solved in the sync function, in the sync gateway anyway. And also on the client side. You can even have scenarios like you have a mobile and he's only pulling data, he's not sending, so this is easier because there's only one revision to worry about, so you can ignore everything else. When you have a duplex communication that he's sending and getting back, then you might want to deal with revisions, you know. It happened, and this is really hard to actually do on your own. One good example that I found myself when I was using Evernote. So I had Evernote in my phone and I had made some changes in the web app, and they were struggling for a long time to get the conflicts sorted out. And nowadays what I found that happens is they just put the both things and say, hey, there's a conflict. Have everybody seen that? Or yeah, so they just put the both versions there and then you do whatever you want. So you can figure out, okay, this is the older one, I'm going to delete it. But they simply push the responsibility to the end user in the end. Which is not bad. I mean, when you have a conflict, you can always ask the user what to do, if it makes sense to. Anyway, back to this. Like I said, you can synchronize with everything. So you can even put in a Raspberry Pi client and synchronize it. And unfortunately, we don't have time for a demo. But the end of the story, the idea that I want to bring you, I see a lot of people suffering with car data and data migration and doing a lot of handwork on their own when actually we could be using a tool to automate this for us and make better apps. I'm just one software engineer, but if you guys realize the potential of this, then I'm sure we can affect much more people and improve the experience of everybody using your apps and so on. So please use it. Thank you, and if you have any questions, just raise your hand. Yes?
I'm a little bit worried about transaction safeness. You mentioned in the last few minutes that conflicts may arise since everybody is working on a separate set of data, which of course may differ from the other set of some other person.
Yes.
And this is a real problem if you're talking about transferring money from one bank account to another bank account, and well, in the meantime, something happens. A second bank account is deleted or removed,
yes.
And this problem cannot be solved. At least it cannot be solved by the owner of the application that he is running.
So yeah. So the question is how to deal with transactional things that and revisions which you cannot decide on your own, right? Is that
right?
Correct? Yeah, so like I said, let me just go back a little bit. Okay, so there's a trade-off, and like I said, the solution is, I think, never in one end of the spectrum, nor the other. It's somewhere in between. So in your application, you can gradually build it and understand slowly what can be real-time and what cannot be real-time. For some things, you have to use WebSockets. For some things you need, like the example you gave of the bank account, in that case you need definitely some real-time API, which is transaction, which is atomic, so that you can guarantee that it either fails or succeeds, and you're not relying on some external eventual event, let's say like that. So yeah, for this case you should think about relational database and API-centric kind of thing. Well, like I said, you can always mix and match. So, yes, you had another question.
How looks the solution for your father?
I knew this would come up. It's a work in progress. Yeah.
Are you actually using Cocoaheads maps in your app, or is this more or less your hobby project where you
Okay, so I work in the SDK team. I personally not, but I hope my colleagues from here will look into it. But other than that, I did use it professionally on the last company I was in, and I used more Couchbase Lite. The cool thing is it was better than Cardata, so I was like focused more on the local database, but I knew that if we want to expand in the future to synchronize with whatever cloud, we already had everything in place, so yes. And besides the personal project. So. Yeah.
I've always been a bit confused with what Couchbase charges for versus what you can host yourself, etc., etc. So, I mean, if you're not using it here, obviously you're not using it on a production scale, but what's your understanding of what they charge for?
Yeah, good question, you know. Because I don't work in Couchbase, I will tell you any negative I see, honestly. Well, I thought about the same thing. What I can tell you is that they use the Apache 2.0 license model. They're kind of one of these open source commercial companies. I think it's good because when things get tough, you can still pay a company to help you solve a problem, right? And if you don't need the service, it's open source anyway. You can prototype, you can quickly set it up, look at the code, maybe improve it. I don't know, it's an open source project, so yes. Yeah, please.
Two comments. So I don't know if you've mentioned it with Couchbase. CouchDB is our original one, so it's an open source Apache project, so you can just host it wherever you want, and it's really scales. Has a bit different features than on the server side, but it's technically working exactly the same.
Okay, so the question was about CouchDB, right?
Yeah, it's just a common, so it's open source free.
Yes. It's an alternative that I recommend you to look at as well. They're a really nice project. In fact, Couchbase history is a bit complicated with them. In the origins comes from CouchDB, like the founders and so on. But they still talk in the same protocol, so you can replicate.
It's completely compatible.
Yeah, you can replicate Couchbase Lite in Sync Gateway to CouchDB. Okay. So if you think the feature set they have is better for you, I encourage you to use it. I heard some people do this. They use CouchDB in the backend.
Yeah, I love it. Another one, so if you also like Cardata, you can perfectly combine those together. I did it in one project. So using Couchbase Lite as an incremental store for Cardata. And so you have then the Cardata API in the application, and it works pretty good. So you can have your standard mode like before. You just replace the bottom part, and then you have automatic sync.
Yes. Yeah, it's good that you mentioned, by the way, because I forgot to say, but you can actually plug Couchbase Lite to Cardata and have everything synchronized for you, even though you want to use Cardata as a storage layer. So that's also possible. Yeah. I think somebody else had more question. No, nobody.
I think you mentioned it on this, but I don't know if you mentioned it on the slide. This pouch base thing. What was that?
Oh yeah, PouchDB. So PouchDB is a JavaScript database that lies in the browser, and the cool thing is, like I said, it talks this protocol as well of replication. So what you can do is you can have, let's say, a web app. You use interface Ionic, and then your data layer uses PouchDB, which it acts the same way as Couchbase Lite, but for the web browser. Okay.
So you would have an offline copy of your database for an offline web app.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this is really productive. I worked on a project that they were using exactly this setup, and it's so much easier because you just have to work with a local database. It's not like every time you have to think of an API to make a request, and it's pretty handy. It's really good.